In the vast and cold depths of space, far beyond the reach of most civilizations, a strange signal echoed across the galaxy. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it carried something unusual. Alien ships had been traveling through this part of the universe for centuries, yet never had they encountered a signal like this one. This was not a message from a known race, and it did not appear to be a distress call or a simple radio signal. It was something far more mysterious. The ship that picked up the signal was part of a powerful alien race known as the Zorathians. These beings were known for their intelligence, strength, and cunning. They controlled vast stretches of space, having conquered and explored hundreds of worlds. The Zorathians were not afraid of much, and their technology was far beyond that of most species. But the signal, it seemed, was unlike anything they had encountered. Commander Draxon stood before the council of Zorathian leaders. His sharp eyes scanned the faces of his fellow commanders, each one more seasoned and experienced than the last. His report was simple but unsettling. "We've found a signal, something unusual," Draxon began. His voice echoed in the silent room. "It appears to be coming from a distant star system, far from our usual routes. At first, we thought it was a mistake. But after running several scans, it is clear that it's intentional. Whoever or whatever sent this message is trying to reach someone." The room fell silent. The Zorathians were a race of conquerors and warriors, but they had never encountered an enemy quite like this. The council was used to hearing about the danger of new species, but this felt different. There was an unease in the air that Draxon couldn't shake. "Are we sure this isn't some kind of trick?" General Joloff, a battle-hardened veteran, asked, his voice full of suspicion. "Could it be a trap set by an enemy we haven't encountered yet?" "I don't think so," Draxon replied. "The signal doesn't carry the usual characteristics of a trap. It's not luring us into an ambush. It's not a bait and switch. It's simply a message. A warning, perhaps, but not an attack." General Joloff grunted. "Warnings are just the beginning. I've seen enough traps to know that the universe is filled with species trying to get the drop on us. We should be cautious." Draxon nodded. He respected Zoloth's experience, but there was something about the signal that made him feel uneasy. "I agree, but this is different. I can't explain it, but I believe we need to investigate it further." The council debated for several hours. Some members wanted to dismiss the signal, claiming it wasn't worth their time. Others believed it could be a valuable discovery, something that could bring them even more power or knowledge. Finally, after much discussion, they'd reached a decision. "Prepare a ship," the leader of the council, High Commander Talar, ordered. "We will send an expedition to investigate this signal. But be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." The Zorathians quickly mobilized their fleet, and within hours, a sleek, advanced exploration ship was on its way to the source of the signal. The crew, led by Draxon, were seasoned professionals, each one chosen for their skill and experience. They had no idea what they would find, but they were ready for whatever came their way. As the ship traveled deeper into the unknown star system, the tension on board grew. The crew, once confident and bold, now exchanged uneasy glances. The farther they went, the more they realized how little they knew about this part of the galaxy. The stars seemed different here, and the quiet of space was unnerving. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Draxon stood at the ship's observation deck, staring out into the void. He couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Something was out there, waiting. He wasn't sure what it was, but the closer they got to the source of the signal, the more his gut told him that they had made a mistake. "We're approaching the source," said Lieutenant Asha, one of the ship's navigators. Her voice trembled slightly, and Draxon knew she was feeling the same sense of dread. The ship slowed as they neared the planet that the signal was coming from. It was a barren, desolate world, its surface scarred by what looked like ancient battles. There were no signs of life, no colonies or structures, just ruins. "Where is everyone?" Draxon muttered to himself. This planet, it looks abandoned. The crew began their descent, preparing to land and explore. As they touched down, the eerie silence of the planet seemed to swallow them whole. The ship's engines powered down, and the crew stepped out, their boots crunching on the cracked ground. It didn't take long for them to find the first sign of something strange. Scattered across the surface were strange markings, alien symbols, and signs of violent conflict. It looked as though the planet had once been a battleground, but for who or what, they couldn't say. There were no bodies, no signs of recent life, just remnants of destruction. Draxon signaled for his team to spread out and begin their search. The further they went, the more they realized that this planet was not just abandoned. It had been wiped clean. Whatever had happened here was something catastrophic, something that had erased all traces of life. And that's when they found it. Hidden beneath a pile of rubble, they uncovered a strange metallic object. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The object was clearly not of Zorathian origin. As Draxon inspected it, a strange feeling washed over him. The object seemed to pulse with an energy, a force that made his skin crawl. Then, as if responding to their presence, the object emitted a faint low hum. It was the same hum as the signal they had received. And Draxon understood. Whatever had destroyed this world wasn't a natural disaster. It was something far more dangerous. Something human. The alien ship touched down with a quiet hiss as the landing gear settled onto the planet's cracked surface. The crew, led by Commander Draxon, disembarked cautiously, their boots crunching on the dust as they moved in a tight formation. The planet was eerily silent, not a single sound from the wind or wildlife, if there had ever been any. The skies overhead were a dull shade of gray, casting everything below in a dull, lifeless light. This world felt abandoned, haunted even, as if something dark had swallowed it whole. "Stay sharp," Draxon ordered, his voice steady but with an edge of unease. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The team spread out, scanning the area with their advanced equipment. The planet's surface was marked with signs of ancient conflict, scratches in the ground, large craters that looked like they had been made by massive explosions, and what appeared to be the remnants of weapons scattered across the landscape. These were not the weapons of any race the Zorathians had encountered before. They were crude, yet powerful, designed for destruction on a scale beyond anything they had ever seen. Lieutenant Asha, the ship's lead navigator, scanned the horizon with her handheld device. "Commander," she called out, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. "Look at this." Draxon made his way over to where she stood, staring at a series of deep gashes in the ground. They weren't natural, no mere rift caused by geological activity. These were intentional, made by something, or someone, deliberately carving through the surface. What could have made these? Asha asked, almost to herself. Her eyes traced the jagged lines in the dirt that seemed to form a path leading toward a distant hill. "Let's follow it," Draxon ordered. The team moved cautiously, their eyes darting from side to side, constantly on the lookout for any signs of life. But all they found were the remnants of destruction, scattered pieces of metal that glinted under the gray sky, pieces of what might once have been ships or structures, now reduced to scrap. As they neared the hill, the air grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was thick with the weight of history, of loss. Draxon felt it, an unsettling sense that they weren't alone. But he pushed the feeling aside. There was no sign of life, no motion. Yet the deeper they went, the more intense the sensation became. At the top of the hill, they found the remains of what looked like a battlefield. Charred debris and remnants of what could only be described as an ancient war zone lay scattered around them. The air smelled faintly of burning metal, a reminder of the violence that had occurred here. What struck them the most, however, was the sheer scale of it. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was a world-altering conflict. But who had fought here? Who had lost? Lieutenant Zurich, the ship's weapons expert, knelt by a shattered piece of wreckage, inspecting it closely. "This is strange," he muttered. "The materials here, this isn't Zorathian technology. It's old, very old, but it's not alien either. I've never seen anything like it." Draxon squatted beside him, eyeing the fragments. They were like nothing the Zorathians had ever encountered. The design was rugged, almost primitive, but the technology within was far too advanced to be of any known race. Whoever had fought here had used weapons beyond even the Zorathians' capability. The feeling of dread began to grow as the crew realized they were no longer standing on just an empty battlefield. They were standing in the ruins of a civilization that had fallen, and whatever had destroyed it had been both brutal and efficient. Draxon looked around the area. The landscape was barren, but there were odd patterns in the dust. Footprints, human-sized footprints. He bent down, inspecting them more closely. The tracks were not those of any known alien species. They were human. He stood up abruptly, his pulse quickening. The pieces were falling into place, but he still couldn't understand. Humans. How could humans have reached this far into the galaxy? The Zorathians had been the first and only ones to explore these regions. Their empire stretched farther than any other known race, but humans had no business being here. "We need to get back to the ship," Draxon said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Now." But just as they turned to head back to the ship, a low rumble echoed through the air, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. The crew froze, their eyes wide in alarm. Something was coming. They could hear the sound of distant engines roaring, the vibrations getting stronger with each passing second. It wasn't the noise of a storm or an earthquake. It was the unmistakable hum of powerful ships. "They're here," Draxon said under his breath, realizing the truth too late. The humans weren't just a myth or a forgotten race. They were real, and they were far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The Zorathians' greatest fear had just become a reality. They were about to face the ultimate killers of the galaxy. As the rumble of engines grew louder, the crew scrambled to their positions, their weapons drawn, their hearts racing. Draxon's mind raced even faster. The humans, had been nothing more than a myth to his people. Stories passed down through generations, tales of a species that had emerged from the chaos of a dying planet, a race that had been underestimated by every alien species they had encountered. Yet here, in the heart of a desolate world, the evidence was undeniable. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the sound of the approaching ships grew deafening. But still, there was no sight of them. It was as if the air itself had grown heavier, warning them, holding them in place, as if the planet itself was waiting for what was to come. Draxon signaled for his crew to fall back toward the ship, but before they could even begin to move, something flickered in the sky above them. The light, sharp and blinding, sliced through the heavy clouds, and in an instant, a massive ship descended from the heavens. It was like nothing the Zorathians had ever seen, a craft that seemed to defy all the laws of physics they had known. The sleek, angular design of the vessel was unlike any known warship. It gleamed with an unnatural brightness, almost as if it were alive, pulsing with energy. The Zorathian crew stood frozen, their eyes wide in awe and terror, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The ship hovered for a moment, and then, without warning, it descended with incredible speed, landing just a few hundred meters from their position. The ground cracked under its weight, sending ripples through the dirt and debris. The doors of the ship slowly opened with a hiss, and out stepped a figure. It was human. A human. Draxon's breath caught in his throat. The human was tall, clad in a dark, matte black exosuit that seemed to absorb the light around it. The figure was imposing, their movements fluid, almost predatory, as they surveyed the surrounding area. "Commander," Asha whispered, her voice barely audible. This is impossible." The human didn't seem to notice them at first. Instead, the figure stood tall, scanning the horizon with a cold, calculating gaze. Then, As if sensing their presence, the human turned slowly, locking eyes with Draxen. Draxen felt a chill crawl up his spine. There was no fear in those eyes, only a chilling, unsettling calm, as if the human had seen far worse than any Zorathian warrior could ever dish out. "You're far from home, Zorathian," the human said in a voice that was deep and commanding, yet devoid of emotion. It was as if the human was speaking to them like they were beneath notice, as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. Draxen's heart raced. He had no idea how this human knew who they were, but it didn't matter. There was something else in that voice, something that made his instincts scream at him to run. But there was no place to run. The ship had already surrounded them, and even if they had wanted to flee, they were trapped on this barren world. "We didn't come here to fight," Draxen said, trying to mask the fear in his voice, though it was clear that his efforts were in vain. "We came to investigate. This world, it's been destroyed. Who did this?" The human's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You should be asking why this world was destroyed," the human replied, his voice cold and final. "And the answer, Zorathian, is simple. You, and every other race that has crossed into this galaxy." Draxen's mind reeled. "What do you mean?" he asked, barely able to contain his confusion. "We're just explorers. We've done no harm." The human's expression hardened. "No harm," he repeated. "You Zorathians aren't as innocent as you like to believe. Every world you conquer, every race you enslave, you leave behind nothing but ruin. You think yourselves the rulers of the galaxy, but all you are is a cancer spreading across the stars." The words hit Draxen like a physical blow. He had heard stories of humans being fierce, but this was something else entirely. This human wasn't just a warrior. They were a harbinger, a force of nature. "We will not allow your kind to spread your destruction any further," the human continued, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "You will leave this galaxy now, or you will be erased." Draxen's mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. The human didn't seem to be threatening them in the way that they were used to. There was no bluster or bravado in words. It wasn't a challenge, it was a promise. And that promise was terrifying. Draxen took a step forward, trying to assert some level of control over the situation, but the human's gaze never wavered. "We're not your enemy," Draxen said, his voice firm, though doubt began to creep into his words. "We only came here to investigate. We seek knowledge, not conflict." The human's eyes narrowed. "And you found something more dangerous than knowledge. Now you'll understand the cost of your arrogance." Suddenly, a loud whine filled the air, and the ground shook violently as a second ship appeared. This one even larger than the first, its hull gleaming with deadly precision. The massive vessel landed with a force that made the air itself tremble. From the ship, more humans emerged, each clad in black exosuits. They moved like a coordinated force, their presence overwhelming. These weren't just soldiers. They were executioners. The leader of the human group stepped forward, and the first human turned to him, speaking in a low voice. Draxen couldn't hear the conversation, but it didn't matter. It was clear that the humans had already made their decision. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a request. This was a warning, and the Zorathians had ignored it. Draxen's mind raced as he realized the full scope of the threat before him. These humans weren't just warriors. They were the galaxy's reckoning. And now, the Zorathians were standing at the edge of their doom. The Zorathian crew stood frozen as the humans moved with terrifying precision. The alien warriors, who had once commanded fear across the galaxy, now found themselves uncertain and vulnerable. The air around them felt thick, charged with the tension of a battle that had already been decided before it even started. Draxen, still trying to gather his thoughts, could barely comprehend the scale of the threat standing before them. These humans weren't just soldiers. They were something much darker, far more ruthless. The human commander stepped forward, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. Each movement was calculated, as if every inch of the ground beneath him was a map he had studied for years. His eyes never left Draxon's, unwavering and cold, like a predator staring down its prey. There was no mercy in those eyes, no hint of empathy, just the cold certainty of a being that had lived through untold wars and seen entire worlds burn. "You Zorithians don't understand." The human commander's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unwavering. "You've spent millennia conquering, destroying, and expanding. You think you're the apex predators of this galaxy, but you've never faced an enemy like humanity." Draxon tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. He wanted to argue, to protest that the Zorithians were not the monsters the humans believed them to be. But deep down, a nagging thought gnawed at him. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they had been the true aggressors all along. But that didn't matter now. The humans weren't here for a negotiation. They were here for something far more deadly. "You came to this planet thinking it was abandoned," the commander continued, "but you didn't understand the warning signs. This world was not wiped out by natural causes. It wasn't destroyed by a dying star or a cosmic disaster. No, Zorethian, this planet fell because of a single species, a species that you are about to meet face to face for the first time." Draxon's stomach twisted as the implications of those words sank in. They were not alone. The humans had not simply wiped out this planet. They had destroyed it with purpose, with ruthless efficiency. The sheer power they wielded was unlike anything the Zorithians had ever seen or imagined. The human commander paused, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage around them, and then turned his attention back to Draxon. "You think your technology makes you powerful," he said, almost with a hint of pity. "But your weapons are nothing compared to what we've built. You used them to destroy. We used them to erase." With a swift motion, the commander raised his hand, signaling to his soldiers. The Zorethians barely had time to react before the human soldiers scattered into position, encircling them in a perfect formation. Every move was precise, synchronized, and deadly. There was no hesitation, no room for error. Draxon's mind raced. There was no escape. There was no way to fight back. The humans had every advantage. The Zorethians were outmatched, outclassed, and they knew it. The once proud empire, the mighty conquerors of countless worlds, now stood at the mercy of a race they had never truly understood. But it wasn't just the humans' power that struck terror into Draxon's heart. It was their indifference. They weren't fighting to conquer or control. They weren't interested in expanding their empire. The humans fought simply to end. They fought to extinguish anything that threatened their vision of the universe, a vision that left no room for species like the Zorethians. The human commander took another step forward, his boots crunching on the broken ground. "Your race has a choice," he said, his tone colder than the space between the stars. "Leave this galaxy or be wiped from existence. The choice is yours. But know this: if you choose to fight, you will lose, and it will be the last mistake your species ever makes." The words hung in the air like an executioner's sentence. Draxon swallowed hard, trying to push the rising fear from his chest. He had always believed in the Zorethian way: strength, power, domination. But now, in the face of the humans, he understood something far more profound. It wasn't just power that mattered. It was the ability to decide. The humans had the power to choose who lived and who died, and they had made their choice. The Zorethians would not be allowed to continue their reign of terror. The human commander turned away, signaling to his fleet. Without a word, the soldiers began to move, surrounding the Zorethians in a way that left them no room to escape. The energy in the air was palpable, crackling with the force of something far beyond the Zorethians' comprehension. The ships in the sky began to hum with energy, their weapons powering up, ready to unleash destruction at the slightest command. "Now," the commander said, his voice low but deadly, "you'll understand why the universe belongs to us." Draxon stood motionless, his mind reeling. He had been wrong. They had all been wrong. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were a force of nature, an unstoppable tide that would sweep through the galaxy and leave nothing but ashes in their wake. The Zorathians had underestimated them. And now, they were paying the price for their arrogance. As the human forces advanced, Draxon could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The Zorathian Empire, once feared across the stars, was crumbling. And in the end, it would not be defeated by weapons or warfare. It would be erased, forgotten by the universe, just like the countless civilizations before it. The humans had won, and the galaxy, it seemed, was about to change forever. The ground trembled beneath the Zorathians' feet as the human soldiers tightened their formation, surrounding them with an almost eerie precision. The air was thick with tension, crackling with the anticipation of a battle that wasn't even about to begin. It had already been decided. Every Zorathian's weapon was drawn, their fingers twitching at the triggers. But deep down, they all knew that their chances of survival were slim. The humans were not here for a skirmish. They were here for eradication. Draxon stood at the center of his crew, his mind racing for a way out. But there was nothing. No strategy, no escape, no chance for victory. The weight of their situation settled like a stone in his chest. He had led his people to countless victories across the galaxy. But this was different. The Zorathians were not facing just another species eager to challenge their power. They were facing something else entirely. Something that didn't need to conquer the galaxy. Something that was here to end them. The human commander, standing several paces ahead, turned and raised his hand, signaling for his troops to hold their positions. The commander's eyes met Draxon's again, and this time there was no hint of pity or arrogance in those eyes. Just a cold, unwavering certainty, the kind of certainty that came from knowing that the universe would bend to your will. Draxon swallowed, his throat dry. He knew that words were meaningless now. The Zorathians had no bargaining chips left, no hope for negotiation. He glanced at his crew, each of them just as tense, just as aware of the inevitable. The human commander took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly on the cracked earth beneath him. "You Zorathians," he began, his voice carrying an icy weight, "have seen only what you wanted to see. You've crossed the stars thinking you were gods, leaving destruction in your wake. You've enslaved, murdered, and colonized. But you never stopped to consider what the consequences would be." The words felt like a slap to Draxon's face. The realization that they had been blind to the galaxy's true balance, that they had ignored the warning signs of their own hubris, struck him hard. But still, he couldn't bring himself to yield. "Not yet. Who are you to tell us what we've done?" Draxon found his voice, though it trembled with barely contained fear. "We have ruled the galaxy. We have built empires. We decide who lives and who dies." The human commander tilted his head slightly, as if considering Draxon's words, and then his lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "No, Zorathian," he said, almost with amusement, "you decided for yourselves. But you never realize that there are forces in this universe far older than you, forces that have already decided who should rule and who should fall. You were never meant to dominate the stars. You were merely a blip, a fleeting mistake. And now, the time has come for that mistake to end." Draxon's heart raced. His mind screamed for him to think of something, anything that could stop this. But nothing came. The humans had taken every option off the table. Their ships in the sky were more than weapons. They were symbols of an irreversible truth. The Zorathians were not just outclassed. They were obsolete. The human commander motioned to his soldiers, and with fluid precision, they began to deploy equipment from their ships, large, spherical devices that seemed to hum with energy. As they rolled them toward the Zorathians, Draxon's mind raced to understand what they were. "These," the commander explained, "are energy-dampening spheres. We don't need to fight you, Zorathians. We don't need to waste lives. These will strip away your weapons, your technology, and leave you with nothing but the reality you've built for yourselves. A race that has nothing left to offer, a race whose time has passed. The spheres came to a stop around the Zorathians, and the moment they made contact with the ground, Draxen felt it. The sharp, sudden drain on his senses. The energy around him began to flicker and fade, like a fire losing its flame. His weapon, once buzzing with power, went completely silent. The technology that had made the Zorathians the galaxy's most feared race was now useless. The air itself seemed to suck the life from their equipment, rendering them nothing more than helpless, powerless beings standing at the mercy of those who had come to claim the stars. For a brief moment, Draxen felt a flash of rage. The Zorathians had once been the most advanced race in the galaxy, the undisputed rulers. Now they were reduced to nothing. It was as if the very universe itself had conspired to show them their weakness. "We have seen races like yours before," the human commander continued, his voice now even colder, "and each one falls the same way. They think they are untouchable, but they fail to understand one fundamental truth. No species, no matter how powerful, can escape the reckoning when it comes." Draxen clenched his fists, staring defiantly at the human commander. "You may have taken our weapons," he said, his voice hard, "but you cannot take our spirit. We will fight. We will not be erased." The human commander's expression remained unchanged. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "It's not about erasing your spirit. It's about removing your capacity to harm. You no longer have the means to fight. Your empire will fall, not because we kill you, but because you have nothing left to do." The realization hit Draxen harder than any blow could have. It wasn't just about defeating the Zorathians in battle. It was about making them irrelevant. The human commander wasn't interested in taking over their worlds or ruling over them. They were simply here to erase the threat. And once that was done, the Zorathians would no longer matter. "You're wrong," Draxen said, though his words lacked the force they once had. "You think you've won, but you don't understand us. You've only given us the will to fight harder." The human commander didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned away, signaling to his troops to begin the process. As the Zorathians stood there, helpless and watching, they knew that the humans were right. There was no fight left in them, not in the way they had once understood it. The game had changed. And with it, the galaxy had shifted into a new order, one where the Zorathians would no longer have a place. The finality of it was crushing, but in that moment, Draxen understood. The humans weren't just enemies. They were the galaxy's answer to the Zorathians' unchecked ambition. And now, the consequences were unfolding before them. The air was suffocating, heavy with a silence that seemed to stretch across the entire battlefield. The Zorathians stood in a tight circle, weapons useless, their pride shattered, watching as the human commander and his soldiers began to methodically dismantle everything they had once considered essential. The energy-dampening spheres had done their job well, stripping away their weaponry, their advanced technologies, and leaving them with nothing but the crushing weight of defeat. Draxen stood in the center of the group, his chest tight with an emotion he hadn't felt in years: helplessness. The Zorathians had always been the apex predators, the masters of the galaxy, but now, here on this barren world, they were reduced to nothing more than prey. They had never faced a force like this. These humans had come not with the intent to conquer, but to erase everything they had built, to undo the very foundation of their empire. As the human commander's troops continued their work, dismantling equipment and wiping out any trace of Zorathian technology, Draxen's mind raced. He had spent his entire life believing that strength was the key to survival, that power could win any battle. But now he saw the truth. Power, when unchecked and unchallenged, could easily become a weakness. And the humans? They had found the way to neutralize that power without lifting a finger. "You still don't understand, do you?" The human commander's voice cut through Draxen's thoughts, as cold and emotionless as ever. "This is not about the strength of your weapons or your empire. This is about the balance of the universe. You have tipped that balance too far. You took too much, you destroyed too much. And now the scales are being corrected. Draxon's heart thundered in his chest as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. The Zorathians had been blind to the universe's true order, always taking and conquering without thought for the consequences. They had believed that their might made them invincible, that no force could stop them. But now, facing these humans, Draxon understood that their true enemy wasn't just the humans themselves. It was the universe's own balance, something that had been tipping in favor of the Zorathians for far too long. We were not the first to fall, the human commander continued, his eyes scanning the defeated Zorathians with an almost pitying look. And we won't be the last. Every empire falls eventually. Yours was no different. Draxon clenched his fists, his mind still struggling to come to terms with the situation. He was a leader, a warrior, yet here he was, standing at the mercy of a species that he had once thought insignificant, a species whose power seemed so small compared to his own. Yet they had found a way to break them, to take everything they had built and render it useless. "What are you going to do with us?" Draxon asked, his voice strained, barely able to keep the bitterness from seeping in. The human commander's lips curled into a faint, emotionless smile. "You have already done it to yourselves. We're just here to finish the job. We will wipe your technology from the galaxy, erase your presence from history, and leave behind nothing but the remains of your failures. You won't be remembered. Your empire won't be remembered. All that will remain is the lesson you failed to learn." Draxon's heart sank. To be forgotten by the universe, to be nothing more than a passing shadow in the stars. That was the true horror. The humans weren't just here to defeat them. They were here to make sure the Zorathians left no mark on the galaxy, that they were erased from history as if they had never existed. "You can't just erase us," Draxon muttered under his breath, his voice filled with both defiance and despair. "Our legacy will endure." The human commander stepped closer, his cold gaze never leaving Draxon's face. "Your legacy is built on destruction, Zorathian. It will be forgotten because it has no place in the universe we are creating. You were part of an age of conquest, of empires that only knew how to take. Now, we are moving beyond that." Draxon's mind spun. "What are you creating then? A universe of peace?" he asked bitterly. "Is that what you think you're bringing? No one lives forever. Even you will fall." The human commander paused, his expression unreadable. "We don't seek to rule," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "We seek to preserve. We do what must be done to maintain balance. The universe has a way of correcting itself. You were a part of that correction, and now it is finished." The words were chilling. There was no arrogance in the commander's tone, no triumph. He wasn't celebrating the Zorathians' downfall. He was simply stating a fact, a truth that Draxon had been blind to for too long. This was not about the humans' desire for dominance. This was about something much greater. The universe, it seemed, had a way of ensuring that no species could dominate it forever, and the Zorathians had overstepped their bounds. As the human commander turned away, signaling for his troops to begin the final stages of their operation, Draxon felt a coldness seep into his bones. The Zorathians had always thought they were above the consequences. But in the face of the humans, they had been forced to confront the truth. There were forces in this universe far beyond their comprehension, forces that operated on a level they had never even considered. The Zorathians were not simply defeated, they were being erased. And as the last of their technology was stripped away, and the remnants of their once great empire crumbled to dust, Draxon realized that they were no longer part of the galaxy's future. They had been cast aside, nothing more than a cautionary tale for the species that would follow. A warning of what happens when you take too much, when you overstep your bounds. The humans were the reckoning. And the Zorathians, they were a relic, doomed to fade into obscurity. The once proud Zorathian fleet now lay in ruin, scattered across the barren landscape like broken toys, the ships now nothing more than twisted metal and fading embers. The human soldiers had been relentless in their dismantling. Each Zorathian ship deactivated and stripped of its technology, every trace of their might erased as if it had never existed. The Zorathians, unable to fight back, watched in stunned silence as their empire, their entire legacy, was reduced to nothing. Draxon stood at the center of the wreckage, feeling a strange emptiness settle into his chest. The victory the humans had achieved was complete, irreversible. No amount of pride, no amount of defiance could change what had been done. The Zorathian fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was now just a memory, a whisper of a time long past. The humans hadn't just defeated them, they had obliterated them from the fabric of history, leaving nothing but ruins behind. As the human commander approached, the eerie calm in the air pressed down harder on Draxon's shoulders. There were no triumphant speeches, no boasts of conquest. The humans weren't here to celebrate. They were here to finalize the inevitable, to ensure that the Zorathians would never rise again. You came here thinking you could still turn things around, the human commander said, his voice soft yet carrying the weight of finality. But there's no turning back now. Your empire is finished. Your legacy, your history, it ends here. Draxon's mind raced, but there was no escape. The last remnants of his crew stood behind him, their eyes hollow, filled with the same sense of loss and realization. They had been conquerors, and now they were nothing more than fugitives in their own galaxy. The humans had not just defeated them, they had made sure that the Zorathians would never be able to make the same mistakes again. "We were supposed to be the future," Draxon whispered, his voice breaking the silence. "We were supposed to be the ones who shaped the stars, who built the greatest empire the universe had ever seen." The human commander shook his head, a faint, almost pitying expression crossing his face. "That was your mistake. You never saw the bigger picture. You never understood that power built on destruction can only last for so long before it collapses under its own weight." Draxon clenched his fists, the anger still burning inside him, even as the hopelessness of the situation consumed him. "And you think you're different? You think you're the ones who will reshape the galaxy?" He spat, his voice thick with disdain. "You'll fall too. No one lives forever." The human commander did not flinch. He stood unwavering, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Perhaps, but we understand that our place in the universe is not about domination. It's about balance, and as long as we uphold that balance, we will endure." Draxon wanted to argue, to fight back, but the words were useless. He could feel the weight of his species' arrogance pressing down on him, the weight of generations that had believed they were untouchable, that they were the rightful rulers of the galaxy. And now, all that was left was this, the bitter taste of defeat, the knowledge that their empire would never be remembered, their actions erased from the collective memory of the stars. The human commander turned away, signaling for his troops to complete their work. Draxon's eyes followed them as they moved through the wreckage, removing the last traces of Zorathian technology, ensuring that no piece of their once great civilization would remain. "You will be forgotten," the commander said over his shoulder, his voice colder than the space between the stars. "There will be no records of your rise, no monuments to your destruction, just the lesson that no one, no matter how powerful, can escape the natural order of the universe." The words stung, but Draxon knew they were true. The humans weren't interested in revenge. They weren't interested in ruling the galaxy. They were simply ensuring that no species like the Zorathians would ever rise again, ensuring that the universe remained in balance. And in that balance, the Zorathians had no place. As the human forces continued their work, Draxon found himself standing alone amidst the ruins of his people's once mighty empire. The stars above, which had once been the canvas for their expansion, now seemed distant and cold, as if the galaxy itself had turned its back on them. For the first time in his life, Draxon understood what true power was, not the ability to conquer, but the ability to adapt and sustain. The humans had not just beaten them in battle, they had shown them a fundamental truth that the Zorathians had ignored for far too long. Strength without purpose, without balance, was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. The Zorathians had tried to shape the universe to their will, but in the end, the universe had shaped them. Draxon glanced one last time at the horizon, at the wreckage of the Zorathian fleet scattered across the land. There was nothing left but the faint memory of a fallen empire. No matter how hard they fought, no matter how many battles they had won, it had all been for nothing. They had lost not just their fleet, but their place in the stars. As the humans began to leave, their task complete, Draxon knew there was no future for his people, no tomorrow to look forward to. The Zorathians were a thing of the past, a species that had tried to conquer the galaxy and failed, a lesson for the others that would come after. And in that silence, with the last of the Zorathian legacy fading away, Draxon understood that the galaxy had been reshaped and that in the end, it would remember the humans, not as conquerors, but as the ones who brought balance to the stars. The Zorathians had been a warning, and the humans, the true inheritors of the galaxy, would continue their journey, knowing that their power lay not in domination, but in preserving the fragile balance of life.